Rivalries. Some of the greatest stories of all time feature rivalries. Two people competing against one another for a similar goal, each giving it his all and not feeling satisfied until they reign victorious over their counterpart. This is especially true in the NBA, as there isn't much that NBA fans love seeing more than a good old-fashioned rivalry. Whether it be James Harden versus Giannis Antetokounmpo, Russell Westbrook versus Kevin Durant, LeBron James versus the entirety of the Golden State Warriors, or of course Zaza Pachulia versus other players' ankles and knees, a good rivalry is the lifeline of the NBA. Today though, we're not going to be taking a look at modern day NBA rivalries, as I think it's fresh in our mind how those have or are currently playing out. But instead, we're going to be taking a look at an almost half-century old rivalry between two of the greatest players of all time. And those players are none other than Wilt Chamberlain and Kareem Abdul Jabbar. Now, for most people, when they hear the name Wilt Chamberlain followed by the word rivalry, the next player that pops into their mind is going to be Bill Russell. And that's for pretty obvious reasons, since their rivalry is one of the most well-documented rivalries in all of sports history. However, while it might not be as well known of a rivalry as the aforementioned rivalry versus Bill Russell, I can guarantee you that Wilt and Kareem's rivalry is still one of the most bizarre and fascinating rivalries of all time. Let's get into it. Just like Wilt Chamberlain's rivalry with Bill Russell, this one as well didn't start off with the two players sharing any type of animosity towards each other. And instead, before Kareem entered the NBA and started making a name for himself on the world's biggest stage, Wilt Chamberlain was actually a mentor to the young Kareem, someone who he looked up to and could turn to advice when it came to navigating the waters of a young athlete trying to find his way. And before we get into what caused their mentor-mentee relationship to evolve into a highly toxic relationship with both sides flinging dirt at one another, we're going to need to understand the personalities of both of these bigger-than-life personas first. So let's start with Wilt Chamberlain. Now, I've already made one video regarding Wilt and some of the myths and lies that have been told about him a couple of months back. I'll have the link to that in the description box, as well as some kind of annotations so you guys can check it out if you missed it. Otherwise, the best way to describe Wilt Chamberlain would be to say that he was an athlete. Not a basketball player, but an athlete, since even though basketball was the sport that he was most known for playing, he also enjoyed playing more sports as well, some of which even more so than basketball. Besides being an athlete though, Wilt Chamberlain was also a businessman who knew he'd have to be smart enough to come up with ways to keep earning money even after his NBA career. And this is why he would often be found mingling with some of the higher ups in the business world, learning how to make investments so his wealth wouldn't fade alongside his athletic ability. Other than his athletic and business ventures though, Wilt was simply a man who, well, enjoyed living life to the fullest. He didn't give much thought to some of the issues of the world, as things like politics and race meant very little to Wilt Chamberlain. Instead, he would simply spend his free time traveling across the country, meeting women, and reading about various topics that piqued his interest. Like I said though, I'll have the link to the video discussing Wilt Chamberlain in more detail down in the description box below. Now though, there's Kareem Abdul Jabbar. And while you could say that he was an athlete, he himself would balk at the idea of his playing days and athletic ability being the only things that are remembered about him when his time is all said and done, since throughout his life, he has achieved and fought for numerous things that go well beyond the scope of what he did during his playing career. For example, before Kareem even entered the NBA, or college for that matter, he was fighting for social justice on the battlefields of Harlem during a time when African Americans were beginning to fight for their equal rights. One of these battles taking place on July 18th of 1964. Kareem at the time was working part-time for a small newspaper column covering events relating to his community, which is part of the reason why he felt obligated to check out what was supposed to be a peaceful rally to protest the wrongful death of a 15-year-old African American boy at the hands of a police officer. Except when Kareem arrived at the scene of the rally, there was no peace to be found. Instead, bricks were being hurled and bullets were indiscriminately flying through the air as the situation had erupted into an all-out war. Kareem, saying in his autobiography Becoming Kareem, that he had never been so scared in his life as he ran home in a crouched down position in order not to make himself an easy target for a stray bullet due to his size. Despite the fear that incident instilled in Kareem though, he would continue to use his life to fight against inequalities of all kinds, as he feels that he cannot sit idly by while others are being robbed of their freedom. Now that we have a clear picture of who these two men are, I think you can start to see where their personality differences lied, and how and why their relationship started to grow so sour. Wilt was a player who always cared about being the best player that he could be in every way possible, while Kareem was a fighter who used his career to build a legacy where he could showcase what it is he stands for and fight for others. Wilt Chamberlain never really had a problem with that. He didn't have a problem with anything Kareem was doing off the court, though he would say that because of his involvement in those things, that he was never really giving it 100% on the basketball court. Yeah, Wilt Chamberlain's main problem with Kareem Abdul Jabbar was that he felt he could have been so much better. One huge negative for Kareem, he never pushed his body to the limit. Certainly not the limit necessary for rebounding or defense. He pushed his body for scoring, but that's it. He was never willing to work that hard, which is why he was relatively injury-free. All race cars that run at full speed eventually break down. Kareem never did. That's one reason why the all-time leading point scorer only had 1 or 2 games in which he scored over 50 points. It was with words like these that Wilt constantly used to critique the game of Kareem even well after his own playing days had come to an end, as he was always bringing up the point that for someone his size, he should be able to get so many more rebounds than he was, and that he never really pushed himself harder than he needed to, and that's the only reason he could have such a lengthy career in the first place. And as bizarre as that criticism might sound to some, Wilt Chamberlain wasn't the only person who said similar things about Kareem. Though he may never have put it so bluntly, Jerry West, the great Jerry West, the logo himself, once said that despite how great of a player Kareem Abdul Jabbar is, that he always felt he could have been a little better, that he had more to give. Other than that though, Wilt also seemed to harbor some animosity towards Kareem over the amount of praise that he would receive when he accomplished anything at all in the basketball world. For example, after Kareem passed Wilt on the all-time scoring list, he spoke to reporters the next day and said this: "It's curious, it's really quite strange. If I had half the fanfare that Kareem is getting at this time, I wouldn't know what to do with myself. It doesn't make any sense. And there are a few things that are bothering me about it. If this is so great, well, it's only about 1 of the 90 records that I held. I must be in a world by myself." Yeah, the man was jealous, and almost understandably so. Look, in order to understand where Wilt is coming from here, you have to remember that he was breaking and setting all kinds of different records during his playing days, a lot of which are records that have still yet to be broken to this very day. And yet, despite all that he had achieved, he never received the type of love and adoration that Kareem Abdul Jabbar had gotten. I must be in a world by myself. Those words felt like more than just words to Wilt, as for the most part, he always felt alone. And though he claimed to love his solitude, it's not hard to tell that he did wish for people to love him more than they hated him. As he always said, during his playing days, he was Goliath, and nobody wanted to see Goliath win. Still, despite how Wilt might have felt about Kareem's quote lack of effort or the amount of praise that he received from the fans, maybe there came a point where he took it a bit too far, where he said a little too much and caused the typically reserved and well-mannered Kareem to snap on his former mentor. As in the year 1990, right after Kareem Abdul Jabbar retired from the NBA, he released an entire memo called An Open Letter to Wilt Chamberlain that lambasted Chamberlain for every critique that he threw his way, and it reads as follows: "It's been several years now, Wilt, and you're still criticizing my career with your friends in the press. Since this pattern doesn't seem to have any end in sight, I feel I might as well have a say about the situation. It would seem that someone who has achieved as much as you did would be satisfied with his career. After all, some of the things that you did in your time were quite admirable and have given us an enduring set of records for the books. So why all of the jealousy and envy? In trying to figure this out, I started to look for what you could be jealous of, and that's when the picture started to become clear. Many remember how frustrated you were when your team couldn't win the NCAA tournament. Your talent and abilities were so great that everyone assumed the NCAA was all yours. But after a terrific triple overtime game, Kansas lost. You complained about the officiating, your teammates, and other things, and then quit, leaving college early to tour with the Globetrotters. That seemed to be a pattern for you. After any tough test in which you didn't do well, you blamed those around you and quit. In professional basketball, Bill Russell and the Boston Celtics gave you a yearly lesson in real competitive competence and teamwork, and all you could say was that your teammates stunk and that you had done all you could, and besides, the refs never gave you a break. Poor Wilt. In 1967, your team finally broke through. That 76ers team established records that are still standing today. But the following year, the Sixers lost, and as predictable as ever, you quit. You came to LA and got with the Dream Team. The only lack the team had was leadership for the center position. Bill and the Celtics took one from you in 69, and the Celtics followed suit in 70. People are still trying to figure out where you disappeared to in that series. True to form, after the Knicks beat the Lakers in the World Championship game in 1973, you quit and haven't been on the court since. Now, of course, you come out every so often to take a cheap shot at me. During the 6th game of the World Championship series in 1988, you stated, "Kareem should have retired 5 years ago." I can now see why you said that. If I had quit at the time you suggested, it would have been after a disappointing loss to the 76ers, and it would have been typical of one of your retreats. But after that loss, I decided I had more to give. I believed in myself and in the Lakers and stuck with it. We went on to win 3 out of 4 world championships between 85 and 88. The 2 teams you played for on that won world championships in 67 and 72 never repeated. They never showed the consistency that the Lakers of the 80s have shown, and you didn't want me to be a part of that. Given your jealousy, I can understand that. So now that I have left, one thing will be a part of my legacy. People will remember that I worked well with my teammates and helped us win, while you will be remembered as a whining crybaby and a quitter. Stats and all. 561 words fired straight at the dome of Wilt Chamberlain. After silently enduring Wilt's criticisms over his entire 20-year career, Kareem unloaded every round of ammunition that he had, restocked, and then unloaded again. Now, despite leaving out some what could be called pretty important details in Wilt's career that prevented him from winning more championships, the overall message behind Kareem's open letter to Wilt pretty much was spot on with how many people viewed him back in the day and how some even view him to this very day. That he's a whining crybaby quitter whose selfishness caused him to put his own stats and numbers before the good of the team. Regardless of that though, letting your beliefs of Wilt on the court affect your beliefs of Wilt off the court is a massive mistake to make, where you could only see Chamberlain on the court for 48 minutes per night, leaving a whole 23 hours of Wilt that you don't see. And that Wilt that you didn't see for those 23 hours off the court was anything but selfish, was anything but a loser, and was certainly not a quitter. Kareem said that his old college coach at UCLA, John Wooden, who he respected and developed a lifelong relationship with, would always tell him how much he hated every sports movie that ends with the main team in the end always winning a championship. And if it were up to him, that sometimes the team would lose in the end. And that's because he felt that too much emphasis is placed on the importance of winning. That those movies instilled a belief that you can't have a happy ending unless you win in the end. And regardless of how much Kareem grew to hate him, Wilt Chamberlain had similar beliefs, as he once said that the ultimate winners aren't the ones who simply win, but the ones who are doing the best they can all the time, which is something that no one can ever say that Wilt Chamberlain never did. Unless, of course, you're trying to say that a player playing literally every single minute for his team over the course of an 82-game season isn't a player doing the best that he can do. Wilt Chamberlain versus Kareem Abdul Jabbar. Overall, these two will always be remembered as two of the greatest of all time. And I'm not gonna say that Kareem was wrong for the things that he said about Wilt Chamberlain in that open letter, because I can't say that Wilt Chamberlain was right to say the things that he said about Kareem throughout Kareem's entire career. All I can say is that it's sad that their once fruitful relationship turned so sour and in the end was never salvaged, as Wilt's death in 1999 closed the book on one of the most bizarre rivalries in NBA history.